Good morning, mushrooms, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brothers, sisters, mothers, misters, and to all my cousins out there around the world. It's time to plug in and get the news train a-chugging. What could it be? Any number of things, but in this interesting graphic, we have women in chains, and this is just a creepy thought. Imagine being forced to live with your boss, and that's apparently the case. That is the situation, that's the scenario for nearly 400,000 women in Hong Kong. Whew, yeah, I can't imagine having to live with my boss. That sounds creepy, and something tells me that this situation is rife with abuse. That's all we know about that, and there's not a whole lot of language here, so let's just carry on. Michael Cohen, if you remember the fixer for Donald Trump, his former lawyer, apparently had an early release from prison because, well, you know, when you're friends with the big boss man, they kind of let you slide a little bit. And so he had received an early release from prison. However, now he has violated the terms of said early release, and he is back in custody. He is under the control of the police. They've got him probably not in chains, but back in a jail cell. Well, if you do things wrong and they send you to jail, but then they let you out of jail, it probably gives you the false sense that you can just do whatever you want. However, well, he's back in custody for violating those terms, so maybe they're trying to give him a little indication that you can't do just whatever you want. There are actually some rules that you might have to follow. Moving on. A missing Glee actress is presumed dead. Now, that means they think that she's dead. They don't know. To assume versus to presume. To assume is just make wild guesses and like, well, he's probably going to do that based on your own sort of feelings and so on. Whereas presume is based on some sort of information. You don't have all of the information because you still got the assuming going on there. Don't follow me linguistically on that. But maybe they're working on probability because in the missing person cases, after a certain period of time, there's a certain probability that the person has been killed or died or something, and so they're probably working on some percentages. The chief of the Pentagon confirmed that he was briefed on the intelligence about Russian payments to Taliban. It's been on the show quite a bit in recent days and weeks. Intel is just intelligence which is gathered about your enemies and or in terms of corporations, your competitors, to give you a competitive advantage. And so it's just, yeah, it's really short for intelligence. But it's not about how smart you are, it's about the information you have. And he was briefed on it. Brief meaning another word for short when we're talking about time. But to brief somebody on it is to get them up to speed with the situation that they did not know about. And once again, yeah, it keeps turning up here on the show, so we're not going to dwell on it any longer, and we're going to just move on to the next one. China smacks down the U.S. attempt to say Beijing is willing to engage in nuclear talks. Well, it didn't highlight it. To engage in something is to begin and become involved in some sort of activity. And U.S. tried to say that Beijing is willing to. Okay, don't really want to, but I will do it. And so if you're willing to do something, it means that, yes, you have basically agreed to do it. It may have been done reluctantly or hesitantly, maybe against your will, but you know it's in your best interest. However, the U.S. tried to say that they're willing to talk about stuff, but China just took that little attempt to say it and they went, and they just smacked it down very quickly, very definitively said, no. We never said that we're going to talk about these things. I don't know where you got that idea. No. And so to smack, yes, to punch with a closed fist, yeah, to slap with an open hand. You got forehand and whoosh, backhand. But then we've got other words that just loosely mean hit, and smack is one of them. Smack kind of, because of the sound, it's sort of like an onomatopoeia, a word that is intended to sound and describe the sound that it is describing or representing. And so, yeah, it sort of implies that open-handed, but it's not slap down, though you could say that too. More dark news in a dark hole. The U.S. is diving into a dark COVID hole. Well, if you're in a hole, that means you're underground, and that's not really typically a good place where you want to be. It means bad. And a dark hole is a bad, bad place. Underground, where the sun doesn't go and things get moldy and gross and there's worms and bugs and it's dirty and nobody wants to be there. Yes, they're diving into it. Each morning I get up and I just dive into the headlines. I can't dive into the pool because it's too shallow. It's not deep enough. To dive into something implies going head first, and if you're going head first into anything, you're really committed to it because you're risking some serious injury if things go wrong. And that's why when you dive into it, well, once you start that motion, there's no coming back, and it's a dangerous place to be. I got me 100 diamonds. Woohoo! Thank you very much for that. You're really committing to it, and you're starting a process of motion that is impossible to stop, slow down, and or reverse. Spiraling down the hole and out of control. Tied to the next headline. Fauci, who is fighting with Trump, except he's an expert and Trump is, well, Trump. The coronavirus effects are a perfect storm. It's kind of a fun little term because storms are destructive and violent, and so if it's perfect, so that juxtaposition of the positive and negative is always kind of funny, but a perfect storm is when everything goes wrong. It's like you're driving, you're late to an appointment and you're driving, but then realize you're getting a flat tire, and so then you start driving faster, but then you run out of gas or your car breaks down, so then you have to get out and you're by the side of the road and you drop your phone into a puddle so you can't call for help, and you start walking, but then it starts raining. And yeah, it's just when all of the stars align and create this constellation of terrible, terrible things. And so yeah, we're talking about it causes minor strokes in the brain, it causes joint pain, respiratory problems, blah, blah, blah. It really has enough little symptoms that it can exacerbate any previously underlying conditions and truly undermine the health of the person who catches it. Whew. All right. That long-winded explanation there, and sorry, not so concise, but that calls for more coffee. Okay, it's officially gone now. We can shut the door on the coffee as we open the door to this headline, which is shutting the door on Trump's election doomsday. Sorry, just had to do it. I couldn't resist the temptation. Doomsday is Armageddon. And so if we're talking about his election doomsday scenario, that means that, yes, the apocalypse, Armageddon is coming, and his doomsday would be him losing the race in a landslide loss. And so, of course, he wants to try and take any sort of legal steps that he can, legal measures, to try and prevent that from happening or make it find ways to discredit the election results. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't try any of these goofy little tricks and so on. If they actually release his financial records, it would, I'm certain, have an adverse effect on the election because, you know, he's nothing but smoke and mirrors and there's no real meat on them bones, and it's all just a ploy or recycling vocabulary. You like that? Now, I can't really agree with this. Now, she did sign into this agreement of marrying Trump, and it has served her well for many years. However, she is probably unhappy now. And in her home country of Slovenia, which is a wonderful place full of wonderful people and beautiful nature, I recommend you go to Slovenia once this pandemic passes. But there was a huge wooden Melania Trump statue, and somebody just set it on fire. They lit the fire and burned the statue, and then they removed the charred, smoking, smoldering remains. Yeah, I don't know. Is she a conscious participant and complicit in all of this, or is she just kind of like a hostage that has been taken along for the ride, maybe suffering from a little bit of Stockholm syndrome? Either way, moving on to the Pacific. From Central Europe to the Pacific, Hong Kong was a safe harbor for tech companies. Which companies? The ones that were shut out of China. China wouldn't let them in, but they wanted to be near supply chain and factories and so on, and so they'd set up in Hong Kong and then do business with China. However, now China is in control of Hong Kong, and they're going to be looking into their financials and other things a little bit more closely. It was a safe harbor. Quite literally, Hong Kong exists because it has a nice, if not several, big natural harbors, safe, protected areas for boats to park, in which they're then able and free to engage in trade. And that's why Hong Kong became such a place and why the British leased it for 99 years, etc., etc. However, here it was more used figuratively because we're not talking about the boat so much. It was a financial safe harbor, a harbor to a refuge, a place where things can be protected, and if they're protected, then they can grow and thrive and flourish. Still recycling. All right, here we go. A couple little play on words. Mask Trump, quite literally. Put a mask on that man, but then unmask his taxes because his taxes are being hidden. So we've got a literal use of the word, and here we've got a figurative use of the word. If we're going to unmask something or unveil something, the veil like women wear when they're mourning the loss of a loved one, or conversely, also in the wedding, he lifts the veil as the ceremony is to begin at a wedding. To mask, literally, to unmask figuratively as taxes, because he won't release his financial records. But moving on, more Trump trying to help out his friends who are in hot water, who are in a tough spot, who are in legal trouble. Roger Stone recently, yet another one of his colleagues. I hire the best people. I've got the best people. Yeah, and how many different ones have been arrested and found guilty of crimes and gone to prison? Well, now Trump wants to grant clemency to Roger Stone. And Roger Stone's an evil dude. Watch the documentary on him. It's called Get Me Roger Stone, about how he just topples governments and destroys the world and everything he touches. It's a weird Midas and reverse Midas touch. To grant, just to give. Just like some people get research grants, the government gives money to them to do research, or fairies and genies will grant you wishes, typically 3 wishes. It means to give, to bestow upon somebody. Clemency, nice word, is leniency or mercy. And so if someone's going to punish you and you want clemency, it means go light on me. Don't give me the strict, hard, heavy punishment. Maybe just, as we say figuratively, a little slap on the wrist. Something that isn't really going to hurt, and it will arguably teach you a lesson. It's supposedly teaching you a lesson, but probably really not. It's just a token gesture that a punishment has been given. He hasn't outright said he wants to grant clemency. He's just implying it. And so it's kind of suggesting things through little hints, little clues. You kind of dancing around the issue and you're not coming out and saying it. So anybody listening can read between the lines and figure out what it is that you're trying to say. Yeah, actually that is a similar use of granted. To take something for granted, it is if it will always be there because the powers have granted you that and it will always be there. And if you take something for granted, it means that you don't actually appreciate that which you have. You just think it'll always be there. Like fresh water and clean air. Get ready, the world is ending. But at least we get to be here to see it. Yay! Bill Nye, the science guy, uses a candle to drop some science on TikTok about masks. To drop some science on somebody, which means they're talking nonsense, and you take the science and you drop it on them, saying, "Whoa, yeah, blah, blah, blah," and you're like, no, actually, here's the facts, boink, and then if you drop it, it hits them on the head, and hopefully wakes them up a little bit to what's actually going on. I've never heard a bad thing about the Sikhs. They're always doing everything they can to help education and their communities and really doing good work. They're tirelessly, and that's a great adverb, traveling their communities to make sure everyone has food. To be tired, you're out of energy. If you're tireless, it means you can't get tired, because less means without tiredness, yeah? Tiredness, less, that could also work as well, because English is flexible. Do many things and people will understand what you mean. To do something tirelessly, you never get tired of doing it, and you will just keep doing it and keep doing it. Here's a gesture. Gesture is a movement or an action which is intended to express some sort of feeling, message, or emotion. The prospect of chaos in November. The prospect of something is the likely or the probable outcome, the probable action, the probable happening in the future. And so the probability of chaos in November is growing. How they're gonna pull this off, how they're gonna manage to make it happen in a safe fashion, who knows? It's gonna be interesting. All right, we've got another less here. Vintage photos capture the restlessness of East Berlin's youth. And when we add ness, it creates a noun. If we add less, it means without. And so the without restiness, yeah. And so these kids in East Berlin, they were itching for freedom. They knew that stuff was going on over there across the wall, and they were just, they really wanted to be part of it and do stuff. And these photos were from a specific place and a specific time. This actually does come from wine. And the vintage being the specific grapes from the specific region in a specific year, because different years have different weather, and therefore the grapes have different characteristics and properties. And so we use vintage to describe things that came from a certain time and place. They keep saying he's going to suffer a landslide loss. I've used that phrase, I think, twice even today, just because of the nice sound of it. Well, sound phonetically. This person who wrote the opinion piece, thinks that the chance of his defeat is the opposite of victory. Victory is winning, defeat is losing. They think that it is grossly exaggerated. And in this case, grossly does not mean disgusting. It doesn't mean, it makes you want to vomit, makes your stomach turn. It just means in a very large fashion, like when we're talking about gross earnings, gross income. Believe it comes from German, meaning big, massive, and exaggerated. If you know me, you know I love exaggerating, and it's kind of not lying, but taking the truth and bending the truth or stretching the truth a little bit to make it suit your purposes. In my case, usually to make a story a little bit more interesting or to prove a point, to explain a term. The classic fisherman's tale. I went fishing and I caught a fish this big. Every time you tell the story, the fish gets a little bit bigger. Seems to think that the chance of him being defeated, and by how much, is probably a lot smaller than what people are saying. Grossly exaggerated is a common term for when people over-exaggerate. Some amount of exaggeration is healthy. However, if you over-exaggerate too much, over-exaggerate or grossly exaggerate, yeah, well, then you're pushing the envelope a little bit too far, I guess. Well, that was that for today. Fruitful broadcast and program. Thank you everybody out there for watching. Repetition is the key to retention. Keep it, know it, learn it, love it, live it, use it, don't abuse it. To everybody out there, hope you have a beautiful day and an even better weekend. If I don't see you sooner, Monday morning, 8 a.m. Have a beautiful day and a better weekend. Now I'm just repeating myself. Time to stop the stream. Bye-bye. Yeah, stop it.